It's Thursday on Simon's Trading Channel. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. Hope you've had a good day and you're in good spirits and good health. Okay, so let's jump straight in with the price action analysis. I'm going to do a slightly Bollinger Band-esque video this evening and hope you enjoy it. So I'm actually going to start and work my way up. So I'm going to start on the 4 hour here. So remember, Bollinger Band is a great tool. I wouldn't necessarily trade it on its own because I've backtested trading around the 20 SMA, which is the sort of key thing on a Bollinger Band. And if you just naively trade that, you probably won't do too well, right? But as an indicator, which clearly is what it is, as is the MACD, as are all of the other things you can find free on TradingView where it says indicators. They're not decisive, right? So they shouldn't be, in my opinion, seen as decision makers. They're more like suggestion makers, and so it's best to think about them like that. But generally speaking, when it comes to the Bollinger Bands, logically, the only way you can get a trending move is if the price stays one side or the other of the 20 SMA, which is the midpoint of the Bollinger Band. And you see then the volatility increase with a trending move by a widening of the Bollinger Bands, which of course are just standard deviations either side of the midpoint. So I'm going to start with a 4 hour and work my way up. Watch. I mean, hopefully you're watching anyway. Okay, so 4 hour here. You can see the price is below the midpoint, below the 20 SMA, and there is some volatility expansion to the downside. And that will remain the case and you can see the MACD is also pointing to the downside, and it won't turn back up unless the price gets above 56.7, which you can see it's currently $700 away. And indeed, the midpoint is at 57.7, so $1,000 above there. So right now, it doesn't really look like the 4 hour is likely to change its downside posture. It doesn't mean it won't, it just means it just would suggest that it's not going to. Now, if you remember some of those things, so the midpoint's at 57.7, call it, and the 4 hour MACD will continue falling unless Bitcoin gets back above 56.7. Now, if you go to the daily, while I have a little cough, sorry about that, you can see indeed the price is also in the bottom half of the Bollinger Band, which suggests that if volatility picks up from this position relative to the midpoint, that will be a trending downside move. And also, depending on where today's daily candle closes, which is in 4 hours, it does look like it's going to breach the previous low for daily closures, which was at 57.5. So interesting, because that was also the more or less the midpoint of the 4 hour Bollinger Band. So yes, this is setting itself up for more downside. It's not really, you have to wait for the daily closure, which has 4 hours to go. So we shall see. Now the MACD will continue to fall as long as Bitcoin is closing dailies below 58.4, which you can see it's quite a way away from as we speak, or as I speak. And that midpoint is still at 60,000. If you then work your way up to a weekly, I could do a couple of time frames in between, but I'm not going to go to the weekly. Now the weekly, you can see, hasn't really had any good volatility expansion since it contracted from its wide points on this trending move, and it contracted pretty much to where it is now here, which was the beginning of July. Now, you haven't really seen, or Bitcoin hasn't really seen any volatility expansion on a weekly time frame since then. So you can see the Bollinger Bands have been more or less the same width the whole time. Yeah, it has increased a little bit recently. And I clear my throat again. The midpoint, remember, you can't get a trending move to the upside unless the price on the weekly gets above the midpoint of the weekly Bollinger Band, which is at 63. So Bitcoin would need to close a weekly above there for volatility expansion and therefore a trending move to the upside to even be on the cards. And which basically coincides to this weekly low over here. Now, the MACD will turn back green if Bitcoin can get back above, 63,000, which, as you can see, is pretty much where the midpoint on the MACD indicator is for the weekly time frame. So that's interesting too. The obviously this weekly candle hasn't closed yet, and so the crossing below the zero line is becoming more accurate, but it'll have another. This will change at Sunday midnight for Bitstamp because it's perpetual exchange, and in all likelihood the MACD will come even closer to the zero line, and therefore whatever number is produced will give me a very good spin on a shift in the weekly momentum, not to the upside anymore, which it has been for a long time, since roughly the end of February, beginning of March, to the downside, if that happens. And it'll be interesting to see where that pivot is. It's currently at 45, which is basically around this price action here. And I've mentioned that as a significant area for, in a way, a line in the sand for Bitcoin for this bull run. What else was I going to say? How am I doing for time? 8 minutes. And so, yeah, we'll see what happens, but momentum is still to the upside on the weekly at the moment, my predefined momentum. And then last but not least, I'm going to do the monthly. Now the monthly, so if you remember, from the 4 hour, price below the midpoint, daily, price below the midpoint, weekly, price below the midpoint. Okay, so they all, pending volatility expansion, are likely to move further down. The monthly, it's tricky to get the monthly on because the Bollinger Bands are obviously slow to react because they only move every month. It's still above the midpoint and very much above the zero line. The MACD zero line for the monthly is not so helpful, I've found, but you can see it is still to the upside. It's got downside posture, and indeed Bitcoin needs a monthly closure back above 63,000 to turn that from red to green. So 63 is quite a key level for many of the, or certainly for the weekly and the monthly. And was it the daily as well? No, just the weekly and the monthly. Yeah. So the powerful time frames, the longer time frames. And you can see it's no coincidence that the midpoint for the Bollinger Band on the monthly is coming in at 44,000, which is here, and that price action coincides with this stretch here. So crossing below the zero line on the weekly-ish, because that's not an accurate number yet, and crossing below the Bollinger Band midpoint. It doesn't look like a midpoint here. I shouldn't say midpoint. Bollinger Band sort of anchor point being the 20 SMA, same value, more or less, 44,000. I do think you know, I'm not suggesting the Bitcoin is going to get down to 44,000, but if, let's say it did, which is a bit pessimistic at the moment, I'd say, but let's say it did, that's an extremely key area, and I would like to buy some there. All right, there we go. So a bit of a negative video, but I'm not worried at all. It's just, I'm just sort of relaying some logical information to you all, which I hope you appreciate. And if you do, like, subscribe, share, do all that good stuff. And if you don't, then don't join me tomorrow, because it'll be Friday, which will be CME's closure. Take care. See you tomorrow.